Morning! Today I'm going to show you how to make a simple pinch pot. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to measure out a half a pound of clay. So I've got a chunk of clay here, and I'm going to put it on my scale. It reads a little heavy, so I'm going to pull some off until it reads just about a half a pound. So now that I have my half a pound of clay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth out all of the cracks and, well, all of the sharp, uneven edges and roll it into a ball. Like so. From this ball, I'm going to start to make a cup. I like to start by tapping it against the table so that I get a nice flat edge for the bottom of my cup. I'm then going to take my thumb and shove it into the center. I'm not pressing all the way through, but I am going as far as I can towards the bottom. Now, when you're building anything, you want to make sure you start with the foundation first. You wouldn't build the second story of your house without having a first story of your house, and it's the same thing with anything in clay. So before I start pinching like crazy, I'm going to use my thumb to widen my hole at the bottom of my cup and create what's going to be the inside base of my cup. Like so. From here, I can start to pinch my walls. Now, if I just pinch the clay, it's going to squeeze out in all directions. So as I'm pinching, I'm pressing with my thumb and I'm using the rest of my hand to pull the clay in the direction that I want it to go. Notice that my walls, because of that directed pinching, grow taller rather than wider. Remember, as you are building, you do want to make sure that you're adding water as your clay starts to dry, so that it doesn't crack and get angry. As we build our pinch pot cups, we are aiming for them to be perfect and even. So you want to make sure that you're getting all of the clay, especially in the corners, so that it's nice and even on all sides, even down in these corners. Here, I have a very rough beginning of my pinch pot. At this point, you can start to direct what shape you want it to be. If I want it to be super round, I might turn it on its side and start to roll it to help even out those different edges. I usually like mine to be a little more square, which I'm going to do by tipping it on its side, tapping and then turning, tapping and then turning, tapping and then turning, and tapping again. It's not going to go from rough to perfectly square in one rotation. I'm going to have to spend a lot of time tapping and turning to get that square shape that I want, and then smoothing the sides to make sure that they're all flat and even and unwrinkled. You also want to make sure that the top of your pinch pot vessel is even, which you can do by flipping upside down and tapping against the table. So the final shape of my pinch pot is starting to form, but remember, I'm going to use, at this point, I'm going to spend a lot of time going over my surfaces in every direction to make sure they're all perfectly smooth and all of my corners are perfect. Some things to troubleshoot as we're working on our pinch pots. Looking at this particular pinch pot, The walls are all fairly even enough for this moment, but if I look at the bottom, it's kind of hard to tell, but the bottom is probably about that thick, which is a good 2 to 3 times thicker than the walls. So really make sure that you're pressing all the way into those corners and using all of that half-pound ball of clay. Now, another question that I get is, what do I do if I'm trying to make my pinch pot, but it just keeps getting wider and wider and wider, and it doesn't really look like a little cup anymore? How can I save this? It's a really easy fix. You'll have to do the fix in a couple of spots, but it's not the end of the world. Take a sidewall, fold it over, and then blend that fold back together. Make sure you're not squishing and pinching that area too much. We're really just smoothing out those new seams. Otherwise, you just end up back where you started. And I'm going to fold and smooth in a number of sections to be able to pull this vessel back into a little bit of a cup. If you get to a point where you really think the best option is to start over, remember to squish out your clay and add some water back into it. And mix that all back together before trying to maneuver your clay into a new pinch pot. Your hands are going to get muddy and gross. I like to mix in the clay, and when I think it's sufficiently mixed together, I go wash my hands and dry them off before I return to this ball. So returning to our original pinch pot, mentioned, now we are focusing on smoothing. And there's a lot of different ways you can smooth. You can use a modeling tool to help smooth things out, like I'm using on the inside of my pinch pot. You can use a sponge and water. However, my clay is still pretty damp, so I'm not going to add a whole lot of water to the sponge, just enough that the sponge is flexible. We can use a rib. The metal ribs are really nice if you have a rounded cup, because you can make the walls nice and straight and even going up and down, but it'll still curve around the outside of your cup. You can use a wooden rib or a plastic one. Those work just fine as well. Notice that I'm trying to even out all of the hills and valleys, and I'm also trying to make sure that my corners get a nice sharp edge to them. I'm starting with the body, but I am going to eventually focus at the top. You might have to trim tiny bits off. And on the inside as well. As you go around and continue to smooth, make sure you look at it from every possible angle to make sure that all your corners and all of the sides are smooth and uniform as possible. Already we can start to see a difference in the little pinch pot here. There's still a lot more smoothing to be done. Because by the end, we want all of the lines and cracks and blemishes and the impurities to be smoothed away. So I've spent some time smoothing and going over all the sides of my pinch pot. Spent about a day and a half. Is this 100% perfect? Not quite yet. It is much better than when we left off, but I can still see some wavy bits along the surface. There's areas where the inside wall is not the same thickness all the way around to the outside wall, and I could definitely spend some more time smoothing on the inside. However, for our purposes, this will do just fine.